Marcus started following fitness influencers on Instagram in February. At first, I thought it was great that he wanted to get healthy. He'd show me transformation videos while we ate dinner at our apartment in Denver, scrolling through before and after photos of people who'd completely changed their bodies. "Look how dedicated she is," he'd say, pointing to some fitness model doing squats in a barely there sports bra. That's real commitment right there. I was wearing my usual yoga pants and one of his old college t-shirts, having just finished a 10-hour shift at the veterinary clinic where I work as a technician. I'd been on my feet all day, dealing with anxious pet owners and helping with surgeries. The last thing I wanted to think about was working out, but I tried to seem interested in his new hobby because I loved him and wanted to be supportive. Our apartment was a cozy one-bedroom in the Capitol Hill neighborhood that we'd been sharing for 2 years. We decorated it together with furniture from thrift stores and hand-me-downs from our parents. The living room had this old sectional couch we'd found at a garage sale, and that's where we'd spend most evenings together, watching Netflix and eating takeout from our favorite Thai place down the street. Within a few weeks, Marcus started making comments. "Fitness girls just have more discipline," he said one evening while I was eating ice cream on our couch. He showed me a video of some influencer making a protein smoothie at 5 a.m. She's up before sunrise, already working toward her goals. I looked down at my Ben & Jerry's and suddenly felt self-conscious about my evening routine. I'd always been comfortable with my body. I'm 5'6", and have always been what I'd call average. Not skinny, not overweight, just normal. I played soccer in high school and stayed relatively active, but I wasn't obsessed with fitness the way Marcus was becoming. I worked long hours at the veterinary clinic, often dealing with emergency surgeries that ran late, and when I came home, all I wanted to do was relax. By March, his phone usage had tripled. He'd wake up at 5:30 a.m. and immediately start scrolling through fitness hashtags like gym girl and fitness model and workout motivation. During breakfast, he'd show me workout routines and meal prep videos. "See how she structures her leg day? So much more effective than what regular people do." I started skipping breakfast, telling myself I wasn't really hungry anyway, but honestly, I was just getting tired of his constant commentary about optimization and efficiency. Marcus began commenting on my eating habits constantly. "Maybe try egg whites instead of whole eggs," he'd suggest while I made scrambled eggs for Sunday brunch. "And you could skip the cheese. Fitness girls fuel their bodies properly. They don't just eat for taste." I bought protein powder and started making smoothies instead of eating real meals. Ordered resistance bands and yoga mats online. My comfortable sweatpants that I'd lived in for years got shoved to the back of my closet, replaced by athletic wear that made me feel like I was wearing a costume. The changes started small, but they were constant. Marcus would comment on everything I ate. If I ordered a burger when we went out, he'd suggest I get a salad instead. If I wanted dessert, he'd remind me that fitness influencers treat their bodies like temples. If I had a glass of wine after work, he'd mention how alcohol interferes with muscle recovery and fat burning. It wasn't enough. "You should really learn proper form like this," he said, showing me another video while I folded laundry on our bed. "And maybe we should look into a gym membership. These girls are so toned because they take fitness seriously." I signed up for a 24-hour gym that week, started going at 6 a.m. before work, bought expensive athletic wear from Lululemon and Nike that cost more than I usually spent on clothes in 6 months. The gym intimidated me at first. I'd never been particularly athletic beyond high school soccer, and here I was trying to figure out weight machines and following workout routines I'd screenshotted from Marcus's phone. I felt like everyone was staring at me, judging my form, wondering what this clearly inexperienced girl was doing in their space. But Marcus seemed so excited when I told him about my workouts that I kept pushing through the discomfort. I started tracking my calories using an app Marcus recommended, weighing my food on a digital scale he bought for our kitchen, taking progress photos in our bathroom mirror that I'd send to him throughout the day, hoping for his approval and encouragement. The spontaneous dinner dates we used to go on impossible because I had to plan every meal in advance to fit my macros. Marcus started sleeping in the guest room in late March, said my 5 a.m. alarm was waking him up too early, and he needed proper rest for his own workouts, which had become increasingly intense. When I tried to initiate intimacy, he'd pull away. "I'm trying to focus on my fitness goals right now. Physical stuff is just a distraction from the grind." He spent hours on his phone instead, the blue glow lighting up our bedroom while I lay awake, wondering what had happened to the man who used to hold me every night. Our conversations became entirely focused on fitness. He'd quiz me about what I'd eaten that day, how many calories I'd burned during my workout, whether I'd hit my protein goals. The Marcus who used to ask about my day at work, who wanted to hear funny stories about the animals I'd treated or the difficult pet owners I dealt with, had completely disappeared. Instead, he'd show me transformation photos of women who'd lost 50 pounds or gained significant muscle mass, asking when I thought I'd see similar results. He stopped complimenting me entirely, stopped saying he loved me before leaving for his job at the marketing firm downtown where he'd worked for 3 years. When I wore the expensive athletic wear I'd bought, hoping to get his attention and approval, he barely glanced up from his phone. When I made the healthy quinoa bowls and grilled chicken meals I'd seen on fitness accounts, meals that took me an hour to prep and cook after getting home from 10-hour shifts, he'd eat a few bites and say he was meal prepping now and didn't need me to cook for him anymore. The meal prep thing was particularly hurtful. I've always loved cooking. It was one of the ways I showed love and care for people. My mom taught me when I was little, and cooking dinner together had been one of mine and Marcus's favorite couple activities when we first started dating. We'd go to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, pick out fresh ingredients, spend Sunday afternoons trying new recipes. Now our kitchen was filled with identical glass containers full of precisely measured portions of brown rice, grilled chicken, and steamed broccoli. I started checking his phone when he left it on our kitchen counter, which he'd started doing more frequently. Instagram was always at the top of his recent apps. His liked videos were hundreds of fitness influencers doing workouts, showing off their abs, posing in gym mirrors, wearing sports bras and booty shorts. His search history showed protein supplement stores, fitness equipment websites, and dozens of female trainer accounts with names like @FitBabeAmanda and @GymGoddessJessica and @TonedTiffanyTrainer. What really bothered me wasn't just that the quantity of fitness content he was consuming, but the specific types of accounts he was following. These weren't educational fitness channels or male bodybuilders or general health and wellness accounts. They were almost exclusively young, attractive women in revealing workout clothes, posting videos that were clearly designed to be sexually appealing rather than genuinely educational. I tried bringing this up to him once in early April. I asked why he wasn't following any male fitness influencers or certified trainers who might actually have better credentials and education. He got defensive immediately, saying I was being jealous and insecure, that he was just trying to stay motivated, and these accounts provided inspiration for our fitness journey. He made me feel like I was the problem for being uncomfortable with his consumption habits. The worst part was how he started comparing me directly to these women. He'd show me a video of some influencer doing squats and say, "See how deep her range of motion is? You should work on getting down that low." Or he'd point out how someone's abs looked in a crop top and suggest I might want to focus more on core workouts. Every comparison felt like a criticism. Every suggestion felt like he was telling me I wasn't good enough the way I was. In early May, my mom called me at work during my lunch break. "I've been saving up for months to surprise you and Marcus," she said, her voice excited in a way I hadn't heard in years. "He's been helping me plan something special for your birthday next month. He's going to surprise you with something amazing, honey. I can't tell you what it is, but I think you're going to love it." I hung up, feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. Maybe this explained Marcus's distance and obsessive behavior. Maybe he was planning a romantic getaway, a spa weekend where we could reconnect away from phones and social media and fitness apps. I started imagining different scenarios. Maybe he'd planned a trip to some wellness retreat in Colorado where we could hike and do couples yoga and remember why we fell in love in the first place. Maybe he'd booked us a weekend at some fancy resort with a spa where I could finally relax and we could focus on each other instead of macros and workout schedules. For the first time in months, I felt excited about our future together. I bought new workout clothes that weekend, thinking maybe we were going to some fitness retreat together where I'd want to look good in athletic wear. Researched couples wellness resorts online, reading reviews, and looking at photos of happy couples doing activities together. Started imagining us hiking mountain trails. Marcus finally focused on me instead of his screen, both of us laughing and talking like we used to do. I even started a new workout routine that week, thinking maybe Marcus had planned some active adventure vacation, and I wanted to be in good enough shape to enjoy it fully. I pushed myself harder at the gym, added extra cardio sessions, started doing yoga videos at home in the evenings. I wanted to surprise him with how much progress I'd made by the time he revealed whatever spell trip he'd planned. The morning of May 18th, I woke up at 5:15 a.m. like usual to get ready for my morning workout, but something felt wrong immediately. The apartment was too quiet. I reached across the bed out of habit, even though Marcus had been sleeping in the guest room for weeks, but his side was cold and clearly hadn't been slept in. I got up and walked to the guest room, thinking maybe he'd gotten up early for a workout, but the bed was made and empty. I checked our bathroom, thinking maybe he was getting ready for work earlier than usual, but his toothbrush was gone from the holder we'd shared for 2 years. His shampoo and body wash were missing from the shower caddy. All of his skincare products that had multiplied over the past few months as he'd gotten increasingly concerned with his appearance were gone from the counter. I ran to our bedroom closet and threw it open. His side was completely empty. His work clothes, the expensive athletic wear he'd been buying, his winter jackets, his favorite jeans, the suit he'd worn to his sister's wedding last year. Everything was gone. Even the suitcase we'd bought together for a trip to visit his parents in Portland was missing. I checked the kitchen next. His protein powder containers were gone from the counter. His special blender bottle, the meal prep containers with his name written on them in permanent marker. His coffee mug from his college that he used every morning was missing from the cabinet. It was like he'd methodically erased himself from our shared life. No note on the counter, where we usually left messages for each other. No text message waiting on my phone. No missed calls. No explanation whatsoever. I stood in our kitchen in my workout clothes, staring at the empty spaces where his things used to be, trying to process what was happening. I called him 15 times between 7 a.m. and 2 p.m. Every call went straight to voicemail, and his voicemail box was full. I drove to his office building downtown, parking in the visitor lot and taking the elevator up to the 8th floor where his marketing firm was located. His manager, Sarah, looked uncomfortable when I asked if Marcus was in. "He submitted his resignation via email this morning," she said, clearly confused and concerned. "Effective immediately." We were all shocked. He didn't mention any of this on Friday, and he had several big projects he was supposed to be working on this week. "Is everything okay? We've been trying to reach him too." I drove to his friend Jake's house in the suburbs, a small ranch-style place where Jake lived with his girlfriend Emma. Jake answered the door in his pajamas, even though it was mid-afternoon, looking surprised to see me. "Hey, what's up? Is Marcus with you?" When I explained that Marcus was missing, Jake's expression changed to confusion and concern. "I haven't heard from him in over a week," Jake said, inviting me inside where Emma was watching TV on their couch. "Last time we talked was maybe 10 days ago, and he seemed, I don't know, distracted. He kept checking his phone during our conversation, and he was talking about some fitness stuff I didn't really understand. He mentioned wanting to make some big changes in his life, but I thought he was talking about getting more serious about working out." I spent the rest of that day making phone calls. I contacted his sister Rebecca in Phoenix, who worked as a nurse and had always been close with Marcus. She hadn't heard from him in 2 weeks and was immediately worried when I told her he'd disappeared. I called his parents in Portland, waking them up from their afternoon nap. They were confused and scared, saying Marcus had seemed fine when they talked to him the previous weekend, though they'd noticed he seemed more interested in talking about fitness and health than usual. I called his college buddies, former coworkers from previous jobs, even his cousin in Seattle, who he only talked to a few times a year. Nobody had heard from him. It was like he'd vanished into thin air, except he'd clearly planned this disappearance carefully, taking all of his belongings with him. I filed a missing person report on May 19th at the Denver Police Department. The officer who took my statement was polite, but not particularly helpful. He explained that adults have the right to disappear if they want to, and unless there were signs of foul play or mental health crisis, there wasn't much the police could do. He asked if Marcus had been showing signs of depression or having financial problems, whether we'd been fighting, or if there were any reasons he might want to leave. I tried to explain about his fitness obsession and the changes in his behavior over the past few months, but I could tell the officer thought it sounded like a normal relationship breakdown rather than something criminal. He took down all of Marcus's information and said they'd put out a BOLO alert, but warned me that most missing adults turn up within a few days, having simply needed some space to think. Jake finally called me on May 21st, 3 days after Marcus had disappeared. "I didn't want to get involved," he said, his voice hesitant and uncomfortable. "But Marcus sent me something last night that I think you need to see. I've been debating whether to show you, but Emma convinced me you have a right to know." He forwarded me a WhatsApp message that made my stomach drop. It was a photo of Marcus at what was clearly Miami International Airport, huge grin on his face, holding up his boarding pass like he was celebrating some major achievement. The departure gate was clearly visible in the background, Gate C42. I could see the American Airlines logo and the flight information board showing Flight 12147 from Denver to Miami. The timestamp showed May 18th, 6:15 a.m., just a few hours after I discovered he was gone. Marcus was wearing a new outfit I'd never seen before, expensive-looking athletic wear that must have cost hundreds of dollars, designer sunglasses, a gold chain I didn't recognize. He looked happier and more excited than I'd seen him in months. This wasn't someone who'd impulsively decided to leave. This was someone who'd been planning an escape and was thrilled that his plan was working. When I called my mom to tell her Marcus was gone, she broke down crying in a way I'd rarely heard before. My mom is typically a very composed person. She works as a pediatric nurse and deals with medical emergencies regularly, but she was sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "I gave him $12,000, she said through her tears. "My savings for your birthday surprise. He said he wanted to take you somewhere special, somewhere you'd always dreamed of going. He showed me pictures of these beautiful resorts and spas, and he seemed so excited about planning something perfect for you. I thought he was going to propose." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. This man had spent months manipulating not just me, but my mother, using her love for me and her desire to see me happy as a way to fund whatever fantasy he was chasing in Miami. My mom had been saving that money for over a year, working extra shifts at the hospital, skipping things she wanted to buy for herself. All because she wanted to help create a special memory for her daughter. That night, I sat on our old sectional couch where Marcus had spent months scrolling through fitness models while planning his escape. I looked around at our apartment, at all the evidence of his fitness obsession that remained. The protein powder on our kitchen counter that cost $60 a container. The resistance bands in the corner that I'd never learned to use properly. the gym membership card in my wallet that I'd been paying $89 a month for, the athletic wear hanging in our closet that made me feel like I was wearing a costume. 1,200 miles away, Marcus was living his fitness fantasy with my mother's savings. He thought he could just disappear from his life, from our shared apartment, from the promises he'd made to me, and the trust my family had placed in him. He thought he could leave me sitting here with his empty side of the closet and my mom's broken heart, wondering what I'd done wrong and how I could have prevented this. First update. The past few days have been absolutely insane, and I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. Thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. You guys literally saved my sanity when I thought I was losing my mind completely. Special thanks to whoever said he's probably going to realize real life isn't Instagram, because you were so incredibly right about that prediction. After I found out Marcus had flown to Miami with my mom's money, I tried calling him again obsessively, still straight to voicemail every single time. I sent him about 25 WhatsApp messages that first night, ranging from confused and hurt to absolutely furious and demanding answers. The messages showed as delivered but were never read, which was somehow more infuriating than if they just failed to deliver. I tried reaching him on every platform we'd ever used to communicate. Instagram DMs, Snapchat messages, Facebook Messenger, even LinkedIn, because I was getting that desperate. Complete radio silence across every single platform. It was like he'd either blocked me everywhere or just disappeared from the internet entirely. My mom came over on May 22nd, and we had the most heartbreaking conversation I've ever had with her. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Marcus used to show me those fitness videos every morning while I ate breakfast, and just sobbed for 20 minutes straight. Seeing my strong, composed mother fall apart like that because of Marcus's betrayal made me angrier than I'd ever been in my life. Turns out Marcus had been working on her since mid-April, right around the time he started sleeping in the guest room and pulling away from me physically and emotionally. The timeline made perfect sense in the most horrifying way possible. Marcus had told my mom he wanted to surprise me with a fitness retreat for my 27th birthday next month, somewhere I'd always wanted to go, but never had the opportunity to visit. He said he'd been researching wellness destinations because I'd been so interested in getting healthy lately and wanted to take me to Miami for this amazing transformation experience that would be perfect for both of us. My mom was so excited about the idea of helping to plan a surprise that would make me happy and support my health goals. She'd been worried about me over the past few months because she could tell something was off when we talked on the phone, though I'd never told her about Marcus's behavior changes or how his fitness obsession was affecting our relationship. Marcus had shown my mom printed screenshots of retreat prices, flight costs, personal trainer session fees, meal plan costs, accommodation prices at luxury wellness resorts. He'd made spreadsheets and detailed itineraries that made it seem like $12,000 was exactly what they needed for this incredible wellness vacation that would change my life. My mom said Marcus had even gotten emotional talking about how much he wanted to support my fitness journey and show me how much he believed in my potential. I wanted to scream when she told me this. This man had been mentally and emotionally checked out of our relationship for months, making me feel inadequate and unattractive, while simultaneously convincing my mother that he was planning the surprise of a lifetime to support my health and happiness. The manipulation was so calculated and cruel that it took my breath away. The worst part was my mom kept apologizing to me, like this was somehow her fault for being trusting and generous. She'd been so proud that her daughter's boyfriend cared enough to plan something so meaningful and thoughtful. She'd been telling her coworkers at the hospital about how sweet and considerate Marcus was, bragging about what a good partner I'd found. My mom works as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital Colorado and has been saving every extra dollar for years, planning for her retirement in about 10 years. She works long shifts, dealing with sick children and worried parents, picking up overtime whenever it's available, driving her 2015 Honda Civic that needs repairs instead of getting them done to save money. $12,000 represented months of overtime shifts, skipped lunches, canceled plans with friends, driving her old car instead of getting it fixed properly. I spent hours going through Marcus's social media accounts that weekend, looking for any clues about what he'd been planning or where exactly he might be in Miami. His Instagram was still active, but he hadn't posted anything since May 15th. His last post was a gym selfie taken in our apartment building's fitness center, flexing in the mirror with the caption, "Big changes coming soon. Hack transformation, # new life, blessed," that I thought was about our fitness journey together. His liked videos and story views showed he'd been engaging with fitness content obsessively right up until May 17th, the day before he disappeared. But starting May 18th, there was no activity anywhere. No Instagram likes, no story views, no Facebook activity, no Twitter engagement. Either he'd gone completely offline, which seemed unlikely given his addiction to social media, or he'd blocked me from seeing his activity. What really made me angry was finally looking through his comments on fitness posts, something I'd never thought to check before because I trusted him and respected his privacy. I'd never been the kind of girlfriend who monitored her boyfriend's social media activity, but now I was going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. This man had been commenting on videos for months, not just liking them passively. He was writing detailed responses like goals AF and perfect form queen, and asking specific questions about workout routines, diet plans, supplement recommendations. He was engaging in conversations with these accounts, building relationships, becoming part of their online communities. One comment from April made me want to throw my phone across the room and never pick it up again. He'd written, "My girlfriend could learn so much from your dedication and discipline," on some influencer's 4 a.m. workout video. A woman doing burpees in a sports bra and tiny shorts in what looked like a luxury home gym. The comment had gotten dozens of likes and several replies from other men making similar comments about their own girlfriends. There were dozens of comments like this across different accounts. Marcus comparing me unfavorably to these women, talking about me like I was some lazy, undisciplined burden he was trying to fix. Making it clear to these online communities that he was unsatisfied with his girlfriend and thought these fitness influencers were superior in every way. Then I found something that made everything click into place in the most infuriating way possible. On May 15th, just 3 days before he disappeared, Marcus had commented on a post from an account called @MiamiFitnessBabe, saying, "Can't wait for our training session next week. Going to be life-changing." The account had replied, "See you in Miami, baby. Going to get you in the best shape of your life? DM me for the final details." I clicked on the profile immediately, and it was exactly what you'd expect from the name. Perfect fitness model with an incredible body, flawless makeup even during workouts, designer activewear, aesthetic gym photos taken in what looked like high-end Miami fitness studios. Her bio said, "Personal trainer and life coach, Miami-based, transform your body and mind, DM for private sessions." But something felt off about the account when I looked at it more carefully. All the photos looked heavily filtered and edited, almost too perfect to be real. The lighting was always perfect. Her body looked identical in every photo, like she never had a bad angle. And there was something artificial about the whole aesthetic that I couldn't put my finger on. I screenshotted everything before the account could potentially block me or go private. Then I sent Marcus a WhatsApp message with all the screenshots attached, laying out exactly what I discovered. I told him I knew about @MiamiFitnessBabe, and I knew he'd gone to Miami to meet her for training sessions, not for any birthday surprise retreat. I told him he'd stolen my mother's retirement money to fund his fitness fantasy with some Instagram model, and that he was the most pathetic excuse for a human being I'd ever encountered. I said he destroyed our relationship and betrayed my family's trust for what was obviously a scam or catfish situation, and that he was going to regret this for the rest of his life. The message delivered but wasn't read, just like all my other attempts to contact him. My mom called the bank about potentially reversing the wire transfer she'd sent to Marcus's account, but since she'd authorized it willingly and provided all the verification information herself, there wasn't much they could do legally. The bank representative suggested filing fraud charges with the police, but my mom didn't want to involve law enforcement immediately because she hoped Marcus would come to his senses and return the money voluntarily once he realized what he'd done. My mom is too good and trusting for this world, still believing that people will do the right thing even after being betrayed so completely. By May 25th, I was getting calls from Marcus's parents asking if I knew where their son was and why he wasn't responding to their phone calls or text messages. His family had no idea he'd left the state, let alone the country. His mom, Sandra, said he'd told them during their last conversation that he was taking some personal time to focus on his fitness goals and work on himself, but hadn't mentioned anything about traveling anywhere. When I told her he was in Miami, there was complete silence for about 30 seconds. Then, she asked if this was related to his fitness girl obsession that his sister Rebecca had mentioned to her a few weeks earlier. Apparently, Marcus had been talking to his family about fitness culture and how much more dedicated and disciplined fitness influencers were compared to regular women who didn't prioritize their health and appearance. His mom was absolutely mortified when she understood what had happened. She said she'd noticed Marcus making increasingly weird comments about physical appearance and lifestyle choices whenever they video called, but had thought it was just a healthy phase where he was getting more interested in fitness and wellness. She'd noticed him asking strange questions about why American women couldn't be more like the fitness models he followed online, why people made excuses instead of prioritizing their health, why his generation was so undisciplined compared to these online influencers who had their lives together. She thought it was just typical young adult questioning and searching for meaning, not a dangerous obsession that would lead him to abandon his relationship and steal money. The most infuriating part of all of this was that I still hadn't heard directly from Marcus. Not one word of explanation, apology, or even acknowledgement that he'd completely upended multiple people's lives. It had been over a week since he'd stolen my mother's money and disappeared from our shared life, and he hadn't even tried to explain himself or justify his actions. I kept checking the @MiamiFitnessBabe account obsessively, but it had gone private after I'd found it and messaged Marcus about it. I tried creating a fake Instagram account to follow her, but she wasn't accepting new followers. I spent hours trying to find other social media accounts associated with the same person, but came up empty. Then yesterday evening around 9 p.m., Jake called me with a strange development. He'd gotten a text message from an unknown number with a Florida area code. Just said, "Need to talk urgently. Don't tell anyone yet. We'll explain everything soon." Jake had responded immediately asking what was wrong and where Marcus was, but got no reply to his questions. Jake forwarded me the screenshot and asked if I thought something bad had happened to Marcus in Miami. Looking at that message, I could tell something had definitely gone wrong for Marcus, but I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic about whatever trouble he'd gotten himself into. The man who'd been so confident in his plan that he'd stolen $12,000 from my mother and vanished without explanation was suddenly reaching out urgently to his friend back home. But notably, he still hadn't contacted me or my mother, the people he'd actually hurt with his selfish decisions. He was still being a coward about facing the consequences of his actions. I told Jake to respond if Marcus texted again, but to make it clear that Marcus needed to call me and my mom immediately if he wanted any help with whatever situation he'd created for himself. I wasn't going to let him triangulate through his friends while avoiding accountability for what he'd done to our family. Because here's the thing that I was starting to realize. I had a strong feeling that Marcus's Miami fitness fantasy wasn't going exactly according to plan. And when reality inevitably came crashing down on him, he was going to want to come running back to the stable, comfortable life he'd abandoned. But I wasn't the same person who used to wake up at 5 a.m. trying desperately to meet his impossible fitness standards. I was done being his backup plan when his fantasies didn't work out. Second update, I'm writing this at 3 a.m. because I literally cannot sleep after everything that happened today. I keep replaying the conversations in my head, and I still can't believe this is my actual life. So remember how Marcus sent that cryptic message to Jake about needing to talk urgently? Well, today was the day he finally worked up the courage to actually make contact. At 2 p.m. today, my phone started ringing with a Florida area code that I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer because I get spam calls constantly, and I was at work dealing with a particularly difficult surgery on a German Shepherd who'd eaten a sock. But something made me pick up, maybe just intuition, that this was going to be important. There he was. Marcus's voice sounding absolutely desperate in a way I'd never heard before in the 3 years we'd been together. The connection was decent, but I could hear traffic and what sounded like people talking in Spanish in the background. He started talking immediately without even saying hello or asking how I was, just launched into this frantic, barely coherent explanation about how everything had gone wrong and he needed help getting home. I had to step away from the surgery and go into one of our consultation rooms so I could focus on what he was saying. I cut him off mid-sentence and told him if he thought he could just call me out of the blue after stealing my mother's money and disappearing without a trace, he had another thing coming. That's when he really started begging. He said he was stuck at some rundown hostel in Miami Beach with no money left and couldn't afford to get home. His credit cards were maxed out and he couldn't access his bank account properly because of some kind of fraud alert that had been triggered. He was sleeping in a room with 6 other people, eating gas station food, and had been trying to figure out how to get home for days. The absolute audacity of this man calling on me for help after what he'd done was so unbelievable that I actually started laughing. Here was someone who had methodically planned his escape from our relationship, stolen thousands of dollars from my family, and disappeared without any explanation, now calling me desperate for rescue from whatever situation he'd created. I told him he had exactly one chance to explain where my mother's $12,000 had gone and why he'd lied to her about planning a birthday surprise for me. That's when his story started falling apart in the most pathetic way possible. He claimed he had been planning a surprise for my birthday, but had decided to scout out Miami first to make sure the fitness retreat would be perfect for me. He said he'd used the money for a research trip and was planning to bring me back to Miami later for the actual surprise celebration. When I asked why he'd packed all his belongings for a research trip, he started stuttering and stumbling over his words. Then I brought up @Miami Fitness Babe and his comment about their training session and meeting in Miami. Marcus went completely silent for what felt like 45 seconds, but was probably only about 10. I could hear him breathing and the background noise, but no words at all. He tried to tell me that the account was just a fitness coach who'd been giving him advice about good gyms and trainers in the Miami area for our planned trip. Nothing romantic or inappropriate, just professional fitness guidance from someone who knew the local scene. When I read back his exact comment about their training session being life-changing and her reply calling him baby, he couldn't explain that away convincingly. He started getting defensive. He started getting mensa, saying I was twisting innocent professional interactions into something sinister and inappropriate. He claimed he'd only been trying to learn about Miami's fitness culture to make our future trip better and more authentic. He said I was being paranoid and jealous instead of appreciating how much effort he'd put into planning something special. The conversation was going absolutely nowhere because Marcus kept changing his story every time I cornered him with specific evidence. First, it was legitimate research for our future birthday trip together. Then it was a spontaneous adventure to surprise me with something unique. Then it was work stress making him act irrational and impulsive. Every time I presented him with facts he couldn't deny, he'd pivot to a completely new explanation. What really made me furious was when he tried to turn the whole situation around on me. He said I'd been obsessed with fitness and getting in shape for months, and he was just trying to understand what I found so appealing about that lifestyle and culture. This man had spent months criticizing my body, my eating habits, my workout routine, and my level of dedication, and now he was acting like his fitness obsession was somehow my fault. I reminded him about every specific comment he'd made that had hurt me. The time he said, "Fitness girls have more self-control," while staring pointedly at my ice cream bowl. The morning he showed me some influencer's elaborate meal prep routine and asked why I couldn't be that organized about nutrition. The evening he said, "Athletic women just naturally have better bodies and discipline," while I was struggling through a workout routine I'd started entirely because of his criticism. Each time I brought up a concrete example of his hurtful behavior, Marcus claimed I was exaggerating the situation or misunderstanding his meaning. He said he'd only been trying to motivate and encourage me, and that I was remembering our conversations wrong or taking his words out of context. I finally told him I was completely done listening to his constantly changing lies and excuses, and that he needed to call my mother immediately to arrange paying back the money he'd stolen from her retirement savings. That's when Marcus completely lost control of himself. He started yelling about how I didn't understand what he was going through, and how complicated and scary the situation had become for him. He said he was in actual trouble and needed support from his girlfriend, not accusations and demands for money he didn't have access to. He actually had the nerve to say I was being unsympathetic and cold-hearted during what was clearly a crisis situation for him. I hung up on him immediately, but Marcus wasn't done trying to manipulate me. He called back 7 more times over the course of that afternoon and evening. I answered the first few calls because I wanted to give him multiple opportunities to tell the truth and take responsibility, but each conversation followed the exact same pattern of frantic begging, constantly shifting explanations, and attempts to make me feel guilty for not immediately rushing to rescue him. During the second call, he tried a different approach, breaking down, crying, and saying he'd made terrible mistakes, but had learned his lesson about priorities and what really mattered in life. But he still wouldn't admit specifically what he'd actually done wrong or take responsibility for his choices. He kept saying vague things like, "You know I love you, and I never meant for things to go this far," without explaining what things had gone how far. By the third call, Marcus was trying to negotiate with me like this was some kind of business transaction. He said if I could just wire him enough money for a plane ticket home, he would pay my mother back immediately once he got access to his bank account in Denver. When I asked him what had happened to the original $12,000 he'd stolen, he said it was complicated and involved, and he'd explain everything in detail once we were face to face. How? He promised he'd never ask me for anything again if I could just help him this one time get out of the dangerous situation he'd gotten himself into. He said this would be the last favor he'd ever request, and that he'd spend the rest of his life making up for the mistakes he'd made. I told him the only person he should be calling for help was my mother, whose retirement money he'd stolen under false pretenses. The fourth call was when Marcus started getting genuinely angry at me instead of just desperate and manipulative. He said I was being vindictive and petty, refusing to help someone I claimed to love during what was clearly a genuine emergency situation. He said if our positions were reversed, he would have already wired me money for a flight home without asking so many questions or demanding detailed explanations first. When I pointed out that he'd created this entire situation by lying to my family and stealing my mother's savings, he said I was being emotionally immature and holding grudges instead of focusing on solving the immediate problem at hand. He tried to make me feel guilty for prioritizing accountability over helping him escape from whatever trouble he'd got himself into. The worst part was how he kept insisting throughout all of these calls that his feelings for me hadn't changed, and everything he'd done was supposed to benefit our relationship somehow. He said he loved me just as much as ever, and had never meant to hurt anyone, especially not me or my family. When I asked him how lying to my mother and stealing her retirement money was supposed to benefit our relationship, he said I was being too emotional and angry to understand his reasoning logically. He actually told me I needed to calm down and think more rationally about the situation we were facing together. Like this was some problem we both needed to solve as a team, rather than a crisis he'd created entirely through his own selfish decisions. That's when my mom got involved in the most spectacular way possible. She'd been staying with me since Tuesday because she was worried about how I was handling everything emotionally. And she'd been listening to me get more and more upset with each phone call from Marcus. She'd been pacing around my living room, getting angrier by the minute as she heard his various excuses and attempts at manipulation. During Marcus's 6th call of the day, when I was starting to cry from pure frustration and emotional exhaustion, my mom had finally had enough. She grabbed the phone right out of my hand and put it on speaker before I could even react. I have never seen my mother this furious in my entire life. She told Marcus in the most controlled, deadly, calm voice I've ever heard from her that he was a pathetic excuse for a man who had stolen money from a hardworking mother and broken her daughter's heart with his disgusting obsession with fake online women. She said if he called me one more time without having $12,000 ready to wire back to her account, she would personally fly to Miami and drag him back to Denver by his ears to face the consequences of his actions. My mom is 5'3" and works with sick children for a living, but in that moment she sounded absolutely terrifying, like she could actually follow through on that threat. Marcus tried to interrupt her and offer some kind of explanation or greeting, but she shut him down immediately and completely. She told him she'd heard every single conversation he'd had with me that day, and she was disgusted by his pathetic attempts to manipulate me into feeling sorry for him after what he'd done. She said she'd watched her daughter lose weight, change her entire appearance, and develop an unhealthy relationship with food and exercise, trying to meet his impossible standards over the past few months. And now he had the absolute audacity to call her for help and sympathy after abandoning her for some online fantasy that had predictably blown up in his face. Marcus tried to argue with my mom, saying she didn't understand the full situation and that I was only telling her the negative parts of our relationship while leaving out all the good times we'd had together. He said I was painting him as worse than he really was because I was hurt and angry. My mom shut that down immediately. She told him she'd seen the expensive protein powder he'd pressured me to buy, heard about his constant comments comparing me to other women, and watched me skip meals and develop anxiety around eating, trying to meet his standards. She said she'd witnessed firsthand how his behavior had affected my self-esteem and mental health. Then my mom started asking Marcus direct questions that he couldn't deflect or avoid answering. She wanted to know exactly how much money he'd spent in Miami and what he'd spent it on. She asked him why he'd quit his job if this was supposed to be a short research trip for planning our future vacation. She demanded to know why he'd packed winter clothes and all of his belongings for what he claimed was a brief scouting trip to a tropical city in May. With each question, Marcus's answers became more obviously false and contradictory, and he started getting flustered and defensive. When my mom asked him directly about @Miami Fitness Babe and what kind of training sessions he'd planned with her, Marcus tried to claim he'd never heard that name before and didn't know what she was talking about. My mom told him she'd seen all the screenshots I'd taken of his comments and liked posts, and that lying about it now just made him look even more pathetic. Marcus then admitted he'd talked to some fitness accounts online, hacker, but insisted it was purely for educational and cultural exchange purposes. Nothing inappropriate or romantic, just learning about Miami's fitness scene to plan a better trip for both of us. My mom asked him why he needed to meet fitness influencers in person if he was just interested in cultural education and workout tips. She wanted to know why he'd lied to me about planning a birthday surprise instead of just saying he wanted to take a solo trip to research fitness culture. She asked him how stealing someone's retirement savings was supposed to improve his relationship with their daughter. She pointed out that if he'd really been planning a surprise for me, he would have involved me in some way rather than completely disappearing and refusing to answer his phone. My mom also brought up things I hadn't even thought to mention during my own conversations with Marcus. She asked him why he'd stopped contributing to our shared household expenses in April, while he was secretly planning this expensive Miami trip. She wanted to know why he'd been so secretive about his phone use if he was just learning about fitness and wellness. She pointed out that he'd been treating me like a disappointing roommate instead of a girlfriend for months, while apparently planning our romantic future together. She asked how that made any logical sense if he was really trying to improve our relationship. By the end of that 20-minute phone call, Marcus was sobbing and finally admitting that things had gotten more complicated than he'd originally planned, but he was still insisting he could fix everything if we just gave him time and support. My mom told him he had exactly 48 hours to wire the stolen money back to her account, or we were involving the police and pressing charges for fraud. She hung up on him and immediately called my dad, even though they've been divorced for 8 years. They've maintained a friendly relationship because they both wanted to co-parent effectively, and my mom knew my dad would want to know what was happening with his daughter's boyfriend. My dad came over that evening, and the three of us sat in my living room having the most honest conversation we'd had as a family in years. My mom made coffee, and we spread out all the evidence I'd collected over the past week. Screenshots of Marcus's comments on fitness posts, his liked videos, the messages between him and various fitness accounts. My dad looked through everything methodically, getting angrier as he understood the scope of Marcus's deception. He said Marcus had specifically targeted my mom's biggest weakness, her love for me, and her desire to help with special occasions and milestones. Marcus had been coming to family dinners for almost 3 years, asking my parents for advice about work and life decisions, borrowing my dad's tools when he needed to fix things in our apartment. My dad had started thinking of Marcus as the son he'd never had, proud of the young man I'd chosen to build a life with. He'd been especially touched when Marcus came to him a few months ago asking for advice about long-term relationships and what made marriages work. My dad thought Marcus was getting serious about our future together, maybe even considering proposing. Now, he understood that Marcus had probably been gathering information to use in his manipulation of my mother. My mom was especially hurt by how Marcus had used their relationship. She'd trusted him completely, viewing him as a future son-in-law who genuinely cared about making me happy. She'd been honored that he'd come to her for help with planning something special, and proud that she could contribute to what she thought would be a beautiful memory for her daughter. But here's where things got really interesting, and where the story takes a turn that none of us saw coming. Marcus called again the next morning, and this time he sounded completely different. Not desperate or manipulative or angry, just defeated and genuinely scared. He claimed someone had scammed him out of most of the money and he'd lost almost everything he'd brought to Miami. But he still wouldn't give me specific details over the phone, just kept saying it was worse than I could imagine, and that he'd been stupid to trust the wrong person with his money and personal information. I told him if he wanted my help understanding his situation or getting out of whatever trouble he'd created, he needed to start by being completely honest about @MiamiFitnessBabe and what he'd really gone to Miami to do. No more lies, no more manipulation, just the truth about his intentions and what had happened. There was another long silence, even longer than the previous day. And then Marcus said something that made everything click into place in the most satisfying way possible. He said the person he'd gone to meet wasn't who they claimed to be, and now he was stuck in a foreign city with no money and no way to get home safely. He admitted he'd never actually planned to propose to me in Miami or take me on any kind of birthday retreat. He said he'd met someone online who seemed perfect and had convinced himself that meeting her in person would solve all the problems and dissatisfaction he'd been feeling in our relationship. He'd used my mother's money to fund what he now realized was a completely delusional fantasy. But something had gone very, very wrong when he'd tried to meet this person, and now he was scared, alone, and didn't know how to fix the situation he'd created. That's when I realized Marcus's fitness fantasy had turned into his absolute worst nightmare. And the next day, he was supposed to call me back to explain exactly what kind of trouble he'd gotten himself into. Because despite everything he'd done to me and my family, I needed to know the complete truth about what had happened to that $12,000. My mom thought I should just hang up on him and let him figure out his own problems, but I had to know how this pathetic story ended. Final update. Oh my God, you guys. Oh my God, I am absolutely deceased from what just happened. I cannot believe this is real life, but I have to share this with you because it's the most pathetic, hilarious, karma-filled ending to this nightmare that I could have ever imagined in my wildest dreams. So Marcus called me back this morning like he'd promised, and my mom was sitting right next to me because she wanted to hear whatever excuse he was going to come up with this time. I put him on speaker immediately because I was completely done with his lies and wanted a witness to whatever manipulation he was about to attempt. He started talking, and I could tell immediately that something was fundamentally different about his voice and demeanor. He sounded completely broken, like he'd been crying for hours or hadn't slept in days. He said he needed to tell me the complete, unfiltered truth about what had happened in Miami and why he'd really gone there, no matter how humiliating it was for him. Then Marcus told me the most absolutely ridiculous story I have ever heard in my entire life. Are you sitting down? Because you need to be sitting down for this. @MiamiFitnessBabe wasn't a real person. She was a complete fabrication created by scammers using stolen photos, AI-generated content, and fake social media profiles. This grown man had spent months obsessing over comparing me to and eventually traveling across the country to meet someone who was entirely made up by criminals running an elaborate catfish operation targeting lonely men with money. I started laughing immediately and I could not stop. The laughter just bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, and I was absolutely cackling like a maniac. My mom was staring at me like I'd completely lost my mind, but I couldn't control myself. This man had destroyed our relationship, stolen my mother's retirement money, and abandoned our shared life for a fake person created by scammers with stolen photos and computer programs. Marcus kept talking while I was having my laughing fit, trying to explain how the whole thing had happened. He said @MiamiFitnessBabe had started direct messaging him in early April, sending photos and videos that looked completely authentic because they were stolen from various fitness models' accounts and edited together seamlessly. The scammers had created an entire fake persona using content from multiple different women, building a composite fake person who embodied everything Marcus found attractive. They'd spent weeks having detailed conversations about fitness goals, life philosophy, and relationship dynamics, with her complimenting his physique and telling him he was exactly the kind of motivated, ambitious man she'd been looking for. She told him she was tired of Miami guys who weren't serious about fitness and self-improvement, and that he seemed different and special based on his comments on her posts. She'd said most men just wanted to use her for her body, but he seemed to understand that fitness was a lifestyle and mindset, not just about physical appearance. I was still giggling uncontrollably while he explained this, because the mental image of Marcus having deep, meaningful conversations with literal criminals pretending to be his dream woman was absolutely killing me. My mom started to understand what was happening, and her face was a mixture of horror and secondhand embarrassment. Marcus said the fake account had convinced him over several weeks that he deserved someone who truly shared his passion for fitness and healthy living. The scammers had suggested he come to Miami to train with her at her exclusive private gym, telling him she only worked with clients who were serious about transformation. She'd given him specific instructions about where to stay, what part of Miami Beach had the best fitness culture, how much money he'd need for a month-long intensive training program. She'd sent him the address of a high-end gym in South Beach where they were supposed to meet on May 19th for their first training session. Marcus said he'd been so excited he could barely sleep on the plane. He'd spent the entire flight imagining this perfect meeting where his ideal woman would finally be real, and they'd start this amazing fitness journey together that would transform both his body and his entire life. When I asked him what happened when he got to the gym, Marcus's voice got even smaller and more pathetic. He said he'd waited there for over 4 hours, telling the gym staff he was meeting his new personal trainer. The employees started feeling sorry for him as the hours passed and nobody showed up. He'd messaged at Miami Fitness Babe frantically asking where she was and if they'd gotten their wires crossed about the meeting time or location. All of his messages were being ignored completely. By evening, he realized something was seriously wrong and tried calling the phone number she'd given him for emergencies. The number was disconnected. He went back to her Instagram account and discovered it was completely gone, deleted, vanished, like it had never existed in the first place. He'd tried searching for her name, her photos, any trace of the person he'd been talking to for weeks. Nothing existed anywhere. He'd spent the next 3 days frantically messaging other Miami fitness accounts he'd been following, asking if anyone knew at Miami Fitness Babe or had heard of her training programs. Most of them ignored him completely, but a few responded to tell him he'd obviously been catfished by a scam operation that specifically targets out-of-state men with disposable income. I asked Marcus how much money he'd sent her before flying to Miami, and this is where the story gets even more pathetic. He'd sent her $4,500 over the weeks leading up to his trip. She'd asked for money for new workout clothes so she'd look perfect for their training sessions at the Reactor, for supplements they'd share during his program, for her gym membership renewal, for emergencies with her sick grandmother who was in the hospital. Classic scam requests that Marcus had fallen for completely because he was thinking with the wrong head and living in a fantasy world. So let me get this math straight. Marcus had used my mother's $12,000 to fly to Miami and pay for accommodations, spent another $4,500 sending money to fake accounts, and was now stranded in Florida because he'd fallen in love with criminals using stolen photos. I was laughing so hard I had tears streaming down my face and could barely breathe. My mom had to get up and get me tissues because I was a complete mess, but I couldn't stop finding this hilarious. But wait, because it gets so much worse. Marcus said he'd been trying to figure out how to get home for over a week, but his credit cards were completely maxed out from his fitness obsession, spending over the past few months, and the money he'd sent to various fake accounts. His bank account was empty because of his Miami trip expenses and the cash he'd brought for his month-long training program. He'd been staying at the cheapest hostel he could find, sharing a room with 6 other people, eating nothing but convenience store food and free breakfast from the hostel. He was down to his last few dollars and had been trying to work up the courage to call his parents for help. He'd finally swallowed his pride 2 days ago and called his parents to explain why he was stranded in Miami alone, why he needed money for a plane ticket home, and why he'd quit his job and abandoned his girlfriend without any explanation. Marcus said he'd had to tell his mother why he was in Florida, what had happened to his money, and who he'd really gone there to meet. His mother had been so confused and horrified that she'd immediately put his father on the phone to deal with the situation. Marcus said he'd never heard his dad sound so disappointed and disgusted in his entire life. His father had asked him if he'd really stolen money from his girlfriend's family to chase after some woman he'd met on the internet. When Marcus admitted that the woman wasn't even real and had been created by scammers, his father had called him pathetic and said he was ashamed to have raised such a fool. His mother had started crying when she fully understood that Marcus had manipulated my mother's love for me to fund his delusional fantasy. She'd been so embarrassed and horrified that she could barely speak to him. His parents had agreed to wire him money for a plane ticket home, but only because they wanted to deal with him face to face and make sure he got the professional help he clearly needed. But here's the absolute best part of this entire story. Marcus's parents had called my parents. His mother had gotten my mom's phone number from Marcus and called to personally apologize for her son's behavior and offer to pay back every penny he'd stolen, even though it would completely drain their emergency savings account. When Marcus told me about his parents calling mine, I completely lost whatever composure I had left. I told him he was the most pathetic, ridiculous excuse for a human being I'd ever encountered in my life. I said he destroyed multiple families and betrayed people who cared about him because he couldn't tell the difference between reality and online fantasy. I told him he was so desperate and pathetic that he'd fallen in love with criminals using stolen photos and abandoned real people who actually loved him for fake people who were literally stealing his money. I said even teenagers know better than to send money to people they meet online. My mom took the phone from me because I was getting too worked up and told Marcus that his parents had shown more integrity and character in one phone call than he demonstrated in the entire 3 years she'd known him. She said watching a grown man get completely scammed by such an obvious fake account was like watching someone touch a hot stove after being repeatedly warned it would burn them. Marcus started crying and begging us to understand that he'd made terrible mistakes, but had learned his lesson about what really mattered in life. He said he realized now that I was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he wanted to come home and rebuild our relationship from the ground up. He promised he would delete all of his social media accounts and never look at fitness content again if I would just give him another chance to prove he'd changed. He said he'd go to therapy, get a better job, do whatever I wanted him to do to make up for the pain he'd caused. I took the phone back and told Marcus he was absolutely out of his mind if he thought I wanted anything to do with him after this humiliating disaster. I said I wouldn't take him back if he was the last man on Earth and every other human had disappeared. I told him he'd spent months making me feel ugly and inadequate compared to a fake person created by criminals with stolen photos. I said he'd made me develop an unhealthy relationship with food and exercise, trying to live up to impossible standards set by someone who didn't even exist. I explained to Marcus that I'd already started moving on with my life in healthy ways. I'd continued going to the gym because I actually enjoyed it, and it made me feel strong, not because I was trying to meet his impossible standards. I kept some of the nutritious eating habits because they made me feel good. Not because some fake account had perfect abs in doctored photos. Marcus kept trying to interrupt me to say he'd changed and learned from his mistakes, but I shut him down every single time. I told him that real change would have meant him recognizing months ago that comparing his girlfriend to other women was emotionally abusive behavior. Real change would have meant discussing his travel plans with me instead of lying to my mother and stealing her money. When Marcus realized that neither my mom nor I was going to forgive him or help him beyond this conversation, he started getting angry and defensive again. He said I was being vindictive and holding grudges instead of supporting him during what was clearly a learning experience that had taught him important life lessons. He said that if I really loved him, I would want to help him grow from his mistakes, rather than punishing him forever for one bad decision. He actually had the audacity to say that my reaction was proving that fitness influencers would probably be more forgiving and understanding than I was being. That's when I completely and totally lost my mind. I told Marcus that real fitness influencers would also think he was a pathetic loser and wouldn't want anything they could do with him either. I said the only reason the fake accounts had been nice to him was because they were programmed by criminals to extract money from lonely, desperate men like him. I told him that actual women in the fitness industry would be disgusted by his fetishization of their lifestyle and his willingness to abandon his real relationship for online fantasies. I said he was exactly the kind of creepy guy that women warn each other about in online fitness communities. Before ending the call forever, I told Marcus that getting home was entirely his parents' problem to solve, not mine or my family's responsibility. I said when he eventually made it back to Denver, he needed to stay completely away from me and my entire family, and that if he tried to contact any of us again, we would involve the police and press charges. I told him I'd already started the process of moving out of our shared apartment and finding a new place to live where he couldn't find me. I said I'd blocked him on every social media platform and changed my phone number so he couldn't continue harassing me with calls and messages. Marcus's parents did wire him money for a flight home, and according to Jake, he's been back in Denver for 3 days now. Apparently he's staying with his parents because he has absolutely nowhere else to go after quitting his job and abandoning his apartment lease. Jake said Marcus's mother has been calling everyone in their extended family to apologize for her son's behavior and explain what happened. His father has been telling people that Marcus is banned from using their internet connection until he gets professional help for his obvious internet addiction and reality detachment issues. Jake thinks Marcus's parents are making him get a job immediately to start paying back all the money they spent on his plane ticket and the money they're giving to my mother. They've also apparently told him he needs to start seeing a therapist who specializes in internet addiction and social media obsession. My mom got her complete $12,000 back yesterday, and Marcus's parents included an extra $2,000 as an apology for all the stress and emotional damage their son had caused our family. My mom said she'd never accept help with surprise planning again, but she was incredibly proud of how I'd handled this entire horrible situation. She's been telling everyone she knows about Marcus's fake Instagram girlfriend situation because she thinks it's both the funniest and most pathetic thing she's ever heard in her life. She keeps saying she can't believe she wasted almost 3 years being nice to someone who couldn't tell the difference between a real person and a computer-generated scammer. So that's the end of my Miami fitness catfish saga. To everyone who commented saying he'd come crawling back when reality hit, you were absolutely, completely right. But the reality that hit him was so much more pathetic and humiliating than any of us could have possibly imagined. Marcus apparently tried to create a new Instagram account yesterday to send me a lengthy apology message. I blocked the account immediately and reported it to Instagram for harassment. His parents found out about it and confiscated his phone like he was a teenager who'd gotten in trouble at school. A grown man in his late 20s had his phone taken away by his parents because he couldn't stop trying to contact the woman he'd abandoned for criminals using stolen photos. I genuinely cannot even process how pathetic his life has become. Update. My friend who still works at Marcus's old marketing firm said his former manager has been telling people that Marcus tried to apply for his old job back, claiming the whole Miami situation was a mental health crisis and asking for a second chance. They told him they'd already hired someone else and wouldn't consider rehiring him after he'd abandoned his projects without notice. Apparently, he broke down crying in the office and had to be escorted out by security. I cannot with this man's life choices, you guys. I cannot.